My name is Hani Abdulatif. I'm your lecturer for this semester for macroeconomics. I hope I'm in the right place. I hope you are here for the same reason as well. What I'm going to do today is to give you some overview or introduction of what we're going to cover this semester. And I will also be happy to answer any questions you may have about this module, about the teaching, assessment, or this exciting stuff that you probably waiting to hear about. Before I start, I just want to let you know that you can find me online. I'm recording this lecture now, and hopefully, if there's no issues with the mic, the recording will be on my YouTube channel, Economics. You could also follow me on Twitter or other social media platforms, but mainly the lectures will be on my YouTube channel, Economics. So let's hope it's working. I'm recording, I believe I'm recording the lecture now. Okay, so let's now talk about what we're going to do today. Okay, we hope to explain what macroeconomics is, and also I would like to talk about different aspects related to the module itself. As I said, teaching, communication, how you're going to reach me, the assessment, etc., and any questions you may have about this module. And also I will take you in a tour about the world economy and specific events and some indicators, just to show how relevant macroeconomics is, how relevant what we are going to do here is to the world economy. So it's very important. But let's now start first with the very most basic question. What's macroeconomics? Okay. Before I talk about what is macroeconomics, I actually want to take you back to economics. What do we do in economics? Economics as a subject is all about the economic problem. I'm sure all of you know that already. Okay. So you have limited resources, unlimited wants, and you want to use these resources to satisfy or to meet your unlimited wants. Okay. So in doing so, then you have to make choices. And what we do in economics is studying those choices. Okay? So economics is not about money, it's not about anything else. It's basically studying this behavior, making choices. Okay? Of course, you all understand the opportunity cost, because every choice you make, that means you give up something in the same time. Okay? So, taking you back to the most fundamental point about what economics is, I just want you to keep in mind, okay, we're all aware of the fact that economics is all about the economic problem, about the limited resources, and this or such economic problem faces every economic unit, so not just individuals. It faces actually every individual, so it doesn't matter how rich you are, you still have to make choices. Okay? You still have limited resources compared to your wants. So that applies to every unit. Okay? When I talk about units here, basically individuals, households, firms, name it. So any individual which can make a decision about how to use limited or scarce resources. So basically, just keep that in your mind all the time. So basically what we're trying to do here is just we study the behavior of these individuals or these, economic units. So it could be individuals, it could be countries, it could be any unit that make decisions. So that will take you to the point that what is the difference then between microeconomics and macroeconomics? As you can see from this slide, macro means large. So that's what we're actually interested in. Okay? Maybe in macro you were interested in the behavior of one individual or an individual, how they're going to maximize their utility given whatever restrictions they face. And then that was one thing that you already covered in macroeconomics, or you could look at, we probably looked at how a firm or a single firm, under what market condition they operate, and then how they're going to use their limited resources to maximize their profits. So that was at the micro level, at the small level. But in macroeconomics, then we are interested in the big picture. We are interested in large units. Okay, so we're not talking about one individual. We're talking about all households. We're not talking about one firm. We're talking about all firms. Okay, so we're looking at the whole nation or the whole economy or the economy as a whole. So just taking you from that point where you used to look at individual units, now to look at the bigger picture or to see the whole economy. This is the step that we are aiming for in this module. So, and by the way, whenever you see this icon there, looks like the click here means that this is something that you could read or watch. So it would be nice if you could follow these links and see what I'm recommending for you to read. So this micro and macro, the economic divide, is a very interesting article written by one of the IMF staff, the International Monetary Fund staff. It's very interesting, so I would really recommend that you read that one. If you're not going to click the others, that's fine, but at least that one. Micro and macro, the economic divide. Okay, so now let's go to the point. Let's get to that point then. So what is macroeconomics? Now we know, Hani said, okay, macro means large, so we're looking at large or large units rather than individual units. So if we were to give it a definition, maybe you could say this is the subject that study the behavior of economic or different economic agents. But just remember here, so we're not interested in these individual agents that you probably studied in macroeconomics. Now we're actually looking at the bigger picture. So we want to see how they interact through markets and how they determine overall outcome in an economy. So markets could be goods markets, financial markets, labor markets, etc. So let's just take this definition one part at a time, and let's see what we mean by economic agents. Remember when I said that I said it's economic units or economic agents, the same. So when I talk about micro, I'm interested in a consumer, okay, or an individual. How they're going to use their income, they're subject to some constraint, the prices and income, and how they're going to maximize their satisfaction or their utility. So here actually I'm interested in households, so all individuals. So individuals, and also I'm not interested in one firm, I'm interested in all firms. So this is the business sector. So I'm looking at the business sector, I'm looking at the big picture, I'm looking at the bigger units, okay? So not the individual units. Also, economic agents here could refer to the, or include also the public sector, which include the government and the monetary authorities. So when we talk about the government, we talk about fiscal policy, we talk about taxes, we talk about government spending. When we talk about monetary authorities, we talk about monetary policy, we talk about interest rate, etc. Okay? So more interesting stuff here, you will see how you can actually link those to policy, or how you can link what we study here to what you hear very often in the news, okay, about fiscal policy or monetary policy, interest rate, exchange rate, all this kind of very interesting stuff. And also we have the rest of the world, because we're not living in a closed economy, so we have connections with the rest of the world, so decisions made by economic agents that live abroad still have some sort of impact or links with what happened in the domestic economy. So going back to my definition here, so we actually studying the behavior, remember? So economics is not about money, forget about money, okay? So economics is about studying these choices, the behavior of these economic agents making their choices or making these decisions. So when we talk about economic agents here in macroeconomics, again, so we talk about all households, so the bigger picture, remember, we talk about firms, we talk about public sector. Households, of course, they own the factor of production. They work for wage or salary, so they own labor or capital, and they consume goods and services. Firms, they produce goods and services, and also they hire the factors of production from households. So this is the interaction we talk about. So if you go back again to my definition, so we study the behavior of economic agents. So hopefully now we know what we mean by economic agents and how they interact together. So this is exactly what I mean by the interaction between these different agents. Okay. So households, they work for which income, and then they buy products. So they consume goods and services. On the other side, firms, they hire labor, they produce goods and services. The public sector, as I said before, it means or refers to the government and the monetary authorities. And when we talk about the government, basically we talk about taxes and government spending. So we talk about fiscal policy, basically. And monetary policy, we talk about monetary policy, we talk about money supply, interest rate, exchange rate, etc. Okay? So how this sort of interaction, so that's exactly what we do in macroeconomics. So going back to macroeconomics, we look at the bigger picture, we look at how economic agents interact and how they determine different outcome in the for the overall economy, and that could be looking at growth, how much an economy is growing, okay? And we will learn how do we know whether an economy or a given economy is growing or not. So we need to think about that. We need to measure it. Okay, we need to learn about what that means and how to measure it or how to quantify it. So we can say an economy X is growing and economy Y is not, or X is growing more or faster than Y. Also, it could be related to the general level of prices, so the price level in the economy. Okay, it's not only, I'm not talking about one product, I'm not talking about one service or one good, I'm talking about the price level or the as a whole in the whole economy, average. So we talk about unemployment. Unemployment, well, human capital or labor is one of the resources. We know from what we covered before and from the first slide that economics is all about scarcity, okay, limited resources. So if we have unemployment, that means there's some waste, and that is a problem that we need to understand why it's happened and how to deal with it. Okay, so I'm just giving you examples of what sort of economic or overall economic outcome that we will be looking at. Remember when I started talking about what macroeconomics is? So the first thing we said, macro is large. That's what we know. Macro is big, it's large. And we said, well, it's all about the behavior of, we study the behavior of economic agents. We know what economic agents we talk about. We talk about all households, we talk about all firms or businesses. We talk about the government sector or the public sector, including the government fiscal policy and monetary policies and the government and the monetary authorities. We'll also talk about the rest of the world, our links with the rest of the world as well. So these are the big picture of the economic agents when we talk in macroeconomics. And then how these agents interact together, and then what sort of outcome or economic outcome we'll be looking at. So these are examples of some indicators, you can say, that we look at or that we are interested in macroeconomics. We want to understand, we want to make some judgment about the economic performance for country A or country B. So we look at how much or how fast they grow. We look at the inflation, we look at the unemployment rate, etc. Okay? And also we look at the business cycles and how the economy, or how this is something that is actually embedded in the nature of the economy, that it goes ups and downs. So we have these sort of booms and recessions, and how what determines these sort of cycles. So we need to study these. So these are just some examples of what we will be covering, and also what we are generally interested in macroeconomics. If you have any question, you can ask me. Don't ask the person next to you. Okay? So, just again, I'll carry on with some more examples with real data. So what you can see here is, as I said, one of the important things that we are interested in macroeconomics. We want to understand why country X is richer than country Y, for example, or whatever country. So one way to measure economic performance, we look at how much output a country produces, and based on that we can actually make some judgment, or we can know, or we can have some indication about the size of the economy. Okay, so basically we look at the output. We could also look at the output per person, and that should give some indication about the standard of living in a given country. So what you see in the map, it's, as I said, it's a real world data, and that give us the GDP per capita, which is, again, think of GDP as the output. This is how much a country produces. And per capita here means just per person. So you divide the GB, or how much they produce, divided by the population. So that gives you the GDP per capita. And as I said, that gives some indication about the living standards in a given country. So what you see here goes from like very light blue or nearly white color to dark blue color. So as you move toward the dark blue color, that means it's a richer country. It's higher, or this is higher level of GDP per capita. Okay? So it's very clear when you look at the map here. You see which country is richer than, or where are the rich countries in the world. And that's what we study here in macroeconomics. Again, we want to understand this. We want to understand how countries grow, how the economy can grow. Okay? What are the determinants or the factors that can help a country to grow? So this is just an example, and I put here a caution here when you think about GDP per capita or output per person as an indication of the standard of living, because this is not always true. Okay? So you have to be very careful when you think about the GDP per capita as an indication of the standard of living in a given country, because if I say, I always give this very, very silly and naive example, but it just does the job. Let's say this is our country. Okay? We're all citizens in this country. And we all earn, let's say, 100, well, the total income is 100,000 pounds. I earn 99, and you all share the 1,000 pounds. Does that give any indication about how much rich this country is? It doesn't. That's exactly what GDP per capita does. Oh, this is exactly what GDP per capita tells you. But we usually, a higher level of GDP usually associated with higher level of income. So I'm not saying GDP or higher GDP per capita is bad. It's actually good, but it's not enough to make some conclusion about the standard of living in a given country. So you need to think about the distribution of income. So that's exactly what that's the very silly and naive example I just mentioned now. Okay? So we have 100,000, but I've got 99% of that income. And then you all together share 1%. Okay? So this is, again, it's about inequality, it's about the distribution of income. So this is just a caution I want you to keep in mind when you talk about GDP per capita as an indication of the standard of living in a given country, but it's fine. Okay? But as I said, GDP or GDP growth or higher level of GDP per capita isn't bad in itself, okay? But it's not sufficient. So this just zoom in some countries. You don't need to worry about which countries are which, because these are just the like kind of short code for these countries. So probably you wouldn't. It's very difficult to recognize because I've put so many countries, I guess, on the graph. But what is the message I want to show you here is that, again, some countries are richer than others, So you see some group of countries here enjoy high GDP per capita compared to the others. So this is the GDP per capita. So it's very obvious, and this data goes from 1980 till 2017. Again, as I said, these are real data, and the source from the World Bank. Okay, so what is the point here? So again, the point is to show you an example, or to give you an example of what we will be interested in. GDP, how we can measure that. Okay, how we can make this sort of comparison between different countries. Remember, we're looking at the big picture, and that's what macro means, large. Okay, so we are interested in that. So these are the again one of the examples of the economic outcome that take place or happen because of the interaction of or interaction between different economic agents. Again, what are these economic agents? To households, firms, government or the public sector, and then the rest of the world. So, and this is the, of course, GDP or output, how much they produce. This is an example of this sort of outcome. So, how did the another example, like how did the economy X grow faster or slower than others? So what you see here is the growth rate. So basically what we're talking about here is the percentage change in GDP. So obviously if you look at that, the top one, which is the blue one, I think this is Ethiopia. It's a very poor country, but then it grows really fast. Okay? So remember, what we're talking about here is that how fast they grow. We're talking about the percent change in GDP. So when you compare that, for example, I think that black line is Brazil. So we want to understand what's happening here. So Brazil had like you see this dip down there is like negative growth. So why it happened? I'm not asking you to give me an answer now. Okay? That's an example of what we're going to cover. Things that we're going to talk about. Okay? What determines growth? Okay, what factors can help the country to grow? And again, when we talk about growing, here in this example, we talk about output. We talk about GDP, gross domestic product, or GDP. Something that we will cover in detail in the next lecture. So we'll talk about these different indicators in more depth and more detail, and explain how we define them, how we measure them, how we use them. Okay? And what shortcomings that we need to actually keep in mind when we use these sort of measures. So anyway, so this is just an example of, again, different growth rates, different countries. Again, this is real data from 2010 to 2017. So far, we're talking about what is macroeconomics. So what I started with is just a very simple definition. We study the behavior of economic agents, and we know what those agents are, and how they interact together in different markets, and these will be different lectures. Okay? So when we talk about the goods market, when we talk about labor market, when we talk about financial markets, these are actually different lectures. So we need to know more about how these markets function, how these markets reach equilibrium, what actually happened, the behavior of different agents that interact in a given market, what sort of restrictions they face, etc. This is something we will cover in detail in coming lectures. So another example of the economic indicators that we actually interested in macroeconomics, and you probably have heard about this many times in the news, or very often in the news, is inflation rate. Okay, so we'll talk about inflation. So for now, just think about the rise, or a general rise in the level of price, and the opposite to that is deflation. So we'll talk about the general fall in overall prices. So what we have here, what we want to know in macroeconomics, again, we want to understand what causes prices to rise or to fall. So we really we want to understand this sort of the inflation or deflation. We want to understand both. What are the determinants of inflation? How to keep inflation under control? Okay. So what's the problem when the price the price will go up. Would you like that? The price of everything to go up? It affects you, yeah? So that's basically, that is exactly what I'm saying, what I'm talking about. So again, so we want to study this, and again, this would be a different lecture. But I'm just trying to give you more examples of economic outcomes that we will be looking at. We also will be interested in unemployment rate. Unemployment is, again, is one of the very important macro indicator that give you some indication about how will or about the performance of a given economy. So I think that one, the highest inflation rate in this graph, I think it's either Brazil or Ethiopia, so one of those countries. So what you can see now, like there's a country now where actually they experiencing really high unemployment rate. Why? That's something we are interested in macroeconomics. So we want to understand this. So we will, I think it's next lecture when we talk about unemployment, we'll talk about how we define employment, but for now, so we I put the first bullet point, which show you that if you looking, or if you're active, or somebody active, looking for work, looking for a job, and they can do the job, but they can't find a job, that's what we call an unemployed person. So just very simple definition, just keep it in mind until we come back to these points. So if you don't know much about these indicators, you don't have to worry about it, because this is actually what we're going to cover. Okay? So what I'm trying to give you here is just to give you like a flavor of what we're going to be talking about in this module. So unemployment, yes, we want to understand why unemployment has been rising in a given country, or what explains instability of the labor market in country X or country Y, etc. And as I said before, these are some reading. When you see this, click more if you're really interested to know more about this. And whatever I refer you to is something probably very simple to read. So it's not, I'm not going to ask you to read 1,000 pages. It's probably like one page, or could be even like a 2-minute video or something to watch. So I hope you enjoy that. Anyway, so going back to what we said. So what is macroeconomics? Macroeconomics, again, the study of the behavior of these agents or economic agents. We know what economic agents we're talking about. We talk about households, firms, the government or the public sector, and the rest of the world, and how they interact in the market, different markets. So we talk about labor markets or goods markets, financial markets, and then to determine some economic outcome. Again, we give some examples of what economic outcomes that we'll be interested in, like GDP, inflation. Again, GDP is just the output, is how much a country produces. Inflation rate is again, we talk about the general rise of the price level. And the unemployment rate, we explain what we mean by unemployment. So in general, what we do in macroeconomics, or the general methodology here, we have 4 steps. First, you need to look at the data. Okay, so if you're going to be a macroeconomist in the future, so you probably start with the data, or start with some sort of observation. So you observe a problem or some sort of issue that you want to explain, and then you come up with a theory or a model. Okay, so you make assumptions about the behavior of whatever economic agents involved in this issue or this phenomenon that you want to explain, and then you make some assumptions, or you build what we call a model, which again is just a simplified representation of the real world. So you start from the real world, you see something and you want to explain, and then you take it, you try to simplify it to be able to explain it, and then if you have a good model, or if you have a good theory that can explain this, then you can use that to either to review the past performance to see if your theory can explain what happened in the past. For example, the global financial crisis, which we'll talk about today. Okay, what caused that crisis? What caused that recession to happen? Okay, so if you came up with a theory, so you've seen something happen. So this is from the real world. I try to make some assumptions and try to explain the relationship between different economic agents and how they interact together. And then I come up with some conclusion or say, okay, I've got a good theory that can explain this. And then hopefully then if your theory is good enough, then we could actually use that theory to forecast or predict the future. So talk about the future or to evaluate different economic policies, whether these policies are useful or not. So these are very general steps. What we will be talking about mainly here, or will be interested in here, in macroeconomics as a first year module, we'll be talking mainly about the second step. We'll be talking about the different macroeconomic models. Okay, so I guess this is more interesting to you. At least you want to know what you are going to cover, and also what topics you're going to cover and how you're going to be assessed in this model. But before I just move to this point, if you have any question, please feel free to interrupt me at any point. Okay? Any questions? So the takeaway message: what is macroeconomics? What sort of topics or indicators we will be looking at, we will be covering in this module. So let's talk a little bit more detail about the module itself, what we're going to cover, what we're going actually to cover here in this module. So the module includes 4 parts. The first part, which we started with today, giving you or introducing you to macroeconomics, include different macro indicators, which I already mentioned. The GDP, gross domestic product. We want to know what that means, how this is calculated or how it is measured. And again, this is just the output, okay, how much a country produces. How are we going to calculate that? And unemployment rate and inflation. So these are sort of the key concepts in macroeconomic, or the main macro indicators, which we will cover in the first part of the module. And then we will talk about the short run. So any things like, or any economic outcome or fluctuation that happen in a short period, let's say within a year. So we'll talk about the short run, and then the medium run, and then the long run. So if we split the module into 4 pieces or 4 sections, so the first one will be what we're covering now, with the key concepts, which we will cover today and the next lecture on Friday. And then we'll move to talk about the goods market next week, and then financial markets, etc. The medium run will move to the labor market and its impact on altering or changing the short-run dynamics, how this affects the short-run dynamics. And the last one, or the last section, will be about long run, which mainly talk about economic growth and what determines economic growth. We are interested mainly, we want to know why country X is growing faster than country Y, or how country X can grow faster, etc. So we really want to understand this sort of outcome. So these are the 4 sections. If I go with more details, again, the first topic is just the introduction, which again, this is something today. The goods market is going to be next week. Then we'll talk about financial markets. So these are different lectures. And then when we combine both, so the equilibrium in the goods market, which just think of this as the IS, which is the equilibrium in the goods market. So when investment equals savings, so don't worry about that. So when we bring the goods market with the financial market, we study what is known as the IS and LM model. So LM model, basically, this is again the supply and demand for money, and on the other side, in the goods market, you look at the investment and savings. And then we move to the labor market. So if you think about how we determine wage, okay? So it's again, just think about labor as any other good. So its price, which is the wage, depends on the demand and supply. So we'll study these sort of factors and how wage is determined in the labor market, how equilibrium, so again between supply and demand, is happening in the labor market. And then we will move to the aggregate demand and aggregate supply. So we look at the overall picture, and when we do that, we'll try to evaluate or understand how different policies work. So, for example, in bad time or in recession, okay? So what should the government do? Should they spend more? Should they spend less? Should they collect more tax or less tax? So how the fiscal policy should look like, and also from that side, when we talk about the monetary policy, how the Bank of England or the central bank, what they should do. Should they increase money supply or decrease money supply? Should they increase the interest rate or decrease the interest rate, etc.? So these are sort of policies that we will try to discuss when we come to this point. And then the natural rate of unemployment and the Phillips curve, so the relationship between unemployment and inflation. And the next topic would be inflation and money growth. And finally, economic growth and its determining factors. So these are all the topics that we will cover in this module. Okay? Any questions? People start talking. That means you have questions. Any questions? Okay, no problem. So, teaching and assessment. Okay, so we have 3 lectures per week. So we have 2 lectures. This is the first, and then we have another lecture today. So we have 2 lectures on Monday and 1 lecture on Friday. You have 1 tutorial per week. So please check your timetable. And the lectures will run from week 1 to week 11, and the tutorials will run from week 3 to week 10. So that means no tutorials this week, no tutorials next week. Tutorials will start the week after. Is that clear? Okay. Week 5 is the reading week, so there will be no tutorials, no lectures. Okay? The assessment, 2 parts. The first part is in-class test, which is going to be in week 6. Again, it's going to be in week 6. So in week 6 you have a test, in-class test. We'll talk about this later, but just for now, you should know that you have in-class test in week 6, and that will take place on Friday, the same time as the lecture. So please remember to come. I'll remind you, but on that day you should arrive at least 10 minutes earlier because it's an exam. Okay? So that will be in week 6. And then in addition, and that is 20% of the overall mark. And the spring exam, which will take place in June, and that's kind of essay type questions, that will be 80% and be 2 hours exam. Okay, communication and feedback. So I follow an open door policy, so which means if you see me anywhere, just come and talk to me. When you have a question, come and talk to me. It's fine. So of course, you can come to my room anytime. If I'm there, that's fine. If you see me somewhere around here, just come and talk to me if you have any questions. I don't have any problem if you stop me and talk to me, but if I'm too busy, okay, I'll tell you, and I expect you to accept that. Okay, but generally, I'm very open to chat anytime. So if you have any questions about teaching, about assessment, about anything related to this module, please come and talk to me. If you don't want to, or if you can't come to the office, or if you just email me. This is my email address, and also this is my room number. This is where I should be, and I will be there only during the office hours. Okay, because this is not my office. So I'll be there only during the office hours. Okay, but from time to time I'll try to be there as long as I can, but generally it's only the office hours. And that's why I said if you meet me around, just stop me and talk to me, that's fine. I'm absolutely fine with that. Okay, so I'll jump to the...
Hi guys, I'm from Pearson. I just typed out the top one of your core textbook, which is the Macroeconomics text by Blanchard. Now, you're second years, aren't you? First years. Oh, fabulous. So if you're going to buy the book, if you plan on buying it, obviously you can get it wherever you like. We sell it on Amazon, Waterstones, all over. But you have a Blackwell store on campus. Does everyone know where that is? Yeah, it's just the other side of your student union, just a side towards that theatre, just next door. So if you are going to buy it, please do utilise your campus bookshop, because there's not many left in England, so we'd really in the UK. So we'd really like to. Oh yeah, so yeah, the price as standard is £62.99. This is the first you've heard of book prices. Yes, books are expensive, guys. So the standard price is £62.99, but on Amazon at the moment it is £53, and Blackwell's will always price match that. So if you just go into the store on campus and they've already done it today because I've been in, but you can double check as well on Amazon before, so you can get it there. You can obviously, if I'm not going to make you buy a new book if you don't want to. This one, however, there is quite an important policy change included in the newest edition. I won't pretend I understand it, but something to do with the ISLM model. So it's quite important you buy the newest edition, just because that's affected a lot of the graphs. But yes, I'm also going to give away a free book today. Save someone £60. So if you'd like to take part, I'm going to wait in the corner at the end and give out these golden tickets. So at the bottom of the tickets, they all have a number, and then the winning book will be in the bookshop and it'll have the number in it. So ask any of the staff, show them your ticket, and I'll tell you if you won, and we'll give it to you there.
Sorry. Okay, guys, that's all today. That's all for this lecture. If you have any questions, please email me, or I'll see you at 4 o'clock. Thank you so much. In the first part of the lecture, we started with what is macroeconomics. So macroeconomics, we said macro means large. Macroeconomics is the study of the behaviors of economic agents, how these agents interact in the market. So when we discuss economic agents, we said we are interested not in an individual or a single firm. We talk about households. We talk about businesses or the business sector or firms. We also interested in the public sector or the government and the monetary authorities and the rest of the world. So I started talking about the, I'm not going to repeat myself again, so I'm just going to jump to the where I stopped. We highlighted the topics that we will cover in this semester. And as I said, we have 3 lectures. This is our second lecture today. So it's 2 lectures Monday, 1 lecture on Friday, 1 tutorial. We know about the assessment now. You can contact me anytime. And yeah, this is one important thing. So what I want to say here is that we will be using math, so diagrams and some algebra. So attending the lecture, just listening to me going through these points might not be enough, so you need to practice by yourself. I'm very happy to provide some additional material and resources, such as like short videos to go through some very basic techniques, things that you will need in order to understand and to follow my lecture. So if you feel yourself struggling or there's something that you're not very sure about, just let me know, and I'm very happy to help. Okay? So this is outside the lecture as well, so not just in the lecture. Of course, in the lecture, please stop me at any time, interrupt me, don't worry at all. If you have any question, please ask me, and don't ask the person next to you. Just ask me. Okay, so as I said, so these videos I'll post them every week on Hanomics, but that depends on what you really need, what you want to have. So I don't have something specific in my mind, but we can start with some basics if you need to. Regarding the textbook, just before I forget, so if you, there's a free copy in the university bookshop. So if you haven't taken one of these tickets, you can take one after the lecture. There's also one more thing I want to say about the textbook. I know it's expensive, so I'm sure there will be copies in the library. So that means you don't really have to buy it. You buy it only if you want a copy to be with you at home, or if you want to keep it for long. But in general, I'm sure there will be copies in the library. And also there is an alternative here, Mac New Book. So if for any reason, or if you will go to the library and you can't find the book, just you can use the other one. Okay? So it's not, so you don't have to buy it. But if you buy it, that's fine. I'm not asking you not to buy the book, but I'm saying it's really up to you. So don't feel like you have to buy the book, but it's good to, you will need the book, you know, in any case. If not this book, the other one, Mac New Book, will be fine. So if you can't find the core book, the core textbook, then you just find the other one. Okay, so as I said today, so if we already know now or familiar with what topics we're going to cover in macroeconomics, we try to give a very simple and brief definition of what we mean by macroeconomics and what we should expect when we study macroeconomics. I thought to finish off this part or this introduction by just going through some tour, like in a tour of the world, where we talk about some major event like the global financial crisis, which took place 2007 and 2008, started in the US and tend to become, or it became a global crisis. And then maybe we can look at the a few of those big economies in the world, like the US economy is the largest economy in the world. What we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the main indicators like GDP growth, inflation, unemployment rate, all this, the macro indicators that we already discussed very briefly in the first part of today's lecture. And as I said, if you not sure or if you don't really understand much of these indicators, don't worry, because this is something we will go through in detail. So, as I said, we'll start with a major event like the global financial crisis. If you look at this graph, which shows the GDP, again, we agree that GDP is just the aggregate output or the total output, so how much a country produces, but in this case, you are looking at the world GDP, so the world output growth between 2000 and 2019. And if you look between 2000 and up to 2007, there was a kind of upward trend, so the sustained expansion from 2000 and 2007. However, in 2007, housing prices in the US start declining, and that led to a major economic and a major financial crisis worldwide, not just in the US. Obviously, in the US, the GDP growth became negative, so it was falling, it was declining. So the economy wasn't expanding, it was actually shrinking, it was going negative, or it witnessed negative growth rate, and that started 2008, quarter 3, so the third quarter in 2008, and continued to be negative through 2009. And of course, because the US, as I said a few seconds ago, the US is the largest economy in terms of the size, okay, in the world. Obviously, they have links with almost every country in the world. So these links, so countries usually are linked together through international trade, so exports and imports, or through financial links. So these two channels, or these two types of links, were actually, or caused that the crisis that happened in the US, or the shock that happened in the US, became a global crisis. So basically it affected other countries in the world. And what you can see in this graph, looking at the world GDP growth, you see that big, like this steep dip down there, so it became negative, so it's below 0. And if I look at advancing economies, which is the red line, you will see how bad it was. It was like below minus 2% growth rate. Okay, so that explains how big the problem was in 2006, 2007, and 2008, and that affected not just the US economy, but also advanced economies. If you look at emerging economies, they were growing as well from 2000 to 2007, but then in 2007, they haven't seen negative growth rate, but the growth, economic growth in these countries slowed down a lot compared to how it was before that. So it's very, very obvious by the end of 2008 how all countries in the world suffer from the global crisis. So what we're looking at here is GDP growth rate. And again, remember macro means large, so we look at the big picture. So what we want to learn from this is the importance of understanding what is GDP first, the global, the gross domestic product, how to measure it, and then what indication we can have, or what conclusion we can build on the growth rate. So this is just an example of how you can, one of the macro indicators which you can follow. Another example here, again, just to show the crisis, how bad it was. This graph shows the stock prices in 3 different groups of countries, emerging economies, and in the euro area, in addition to the United States. Again, you see what happened to stock prices between 2008 and 2009. So stock prices were falling as well. So we have GDP growth negative in many countries, many advanced economies, and it was positive in most emerging economies, but still was much lower than how it was in 2007. So again, this is one of the indicators that GDP and GDP growth that we will be interested in. Moving at the United States, or looking at the United States as I said, the largest economy in the world, it produces nearly 23% of the world output. And that explains to you how large it is, how big that economy is. So of course, we said before, higher GDP means, or is likely to be associated with higher income, and higher income means higher standard of living. So that's exactly the case in the States, in the United States. So if you look more closely at how the United States or the American economy performed during the crisis, before and during the crisis and after the crisis. So as we said, there are three main indicators we look at here. The output growth rate, so the GDP growth rate, the inflation rate, and the unemployment rate. So before the crisis, so 1990 to 2007, growth rate was 3%. Inflation rate the unemployment rate 5.4, inflation rate 2.3. Then falling from 3% to minus 1.5, that's during the crisis, that's during the shock. And unemployment increased to 7.5. And actually in 2010 to 2014, you will see that in the time that GDP growth recovered from the shock, from this crisis, it became 2.2%. However, if you compare this with the unemployment actually increased from 7.5 to 8%. So that gives you an indication that usually unemployment rate or unemployment takes longer to recover from a recession or from a shock or from a crisis compared to the GDP. So, but then it improved after that. So if you look at 2015, so it seems in a much better shape compared to how it was in 2007. So this is the three main indicators that we discussed in the previous lecture. What I want to add here is the monetary policy, what the Fed or the Federal Reserve or the central bank, the American central bank, tried to do during the shock or during the recession. They tried to lower the interest rate, which is called the Fed funds rate. So you can see the interest rate was low. It became nearly 0% by December 2008. So they tried to boost the economy, try to push the economy out of the recession by lowering the interest rate. And this is something we will learn about in this module, how basically how the central bank manage or implement the monetary policy. So one of the ways to do this, which exactly what happened during the crisis in 2007, 2008, the central bank, the Fed, the Federal Reserve, or the American Central Bank, they lowered their interest rate, and actually it became nearly zero. So why couldn't they go below that, below 0%? Obviously, this is called a zero lower bound, so you can't go below that, because if you have two choices, to hold cash or to hold bonds. So basically cash is liquid, so you can use it anytime. But bonds is not as liquid as cash, and also, but bonds give you some return. So the idea here is that if this interest rate became negative, then everyone would basically hold cash rather than bonds, and that wouldn't really help. So, but what is the problem then if the interest rate is very low, nearly zero? Again, we will talk about this in more detail when we discuss monetary policy. But for now, the main problem here, when we have very low interest rate, that limits the central bank ability to intervene again. So if there is a recession, and if there is another shock, they can't actually do much about it because it's already zero. So they can't go below that. So basically, it limits the ability to respond to further negative shocks. Second, actually it may lead to excessive risk taking by investors because it's very cheap to borrow. Okay? If interest rate for investors or borrowers, it's a cost. So if the cost of borrowing is nearly zero, you could actually, that may encourage you to borrow more money because it's very cheap to borrow money, okay? Regardless of whether you can really pay this money back or not. So that is the idea of having a very low interest rate may lead to excessive risk taken by investors, and this one of the issues of having low interest rate. Anyway, so one final indicator which I want to refer to here is productivity growth. So productivity is very important concept. It's a very important indicator that tell us much about how an economy is growing and how the income per person is increasing. So if we look at this, these figures in the US, you will see that the productivity growth has slowed down. And again, this is something to worry about because this affects income per person, and that means it might even hit the poorest harder. So this is the first block, or the largest economy in the world. If we compare this to the European area, we have 28 European countries with a common market. In 1999, they formed a common currency area, which used the euro, which replaced their national currencies. So this area faces two main issues. First is unemployment. Second is how to function as a common, how to function efficiently as a common currency area. So regarding the first point, which is again, if you look at the same set of indicators, including unemployment, you will see here that in after 2008, 2009, for example, unemployment went up from 9.4 to 11.1. So in the time that the US economy, where the shock started, where the recession or the financial crisis started, recovered by 2015. If you look at the growth rate in the European area, you'll see that it's 0.7 on average between 2010 and 2014, 2010 and 2014, and in 2015 it was 1.5 compared, which is less than 2.1 before the crisis. But when you look at the unemployment rate as well, you see again it's not doing great because it's actually above the level before the crisis. So the problem here is that the average here is 11.1. So what you see here is an average. And the same way, I ask you to be careful when you explain the GDP per capita as an indicator of the standard of living. Again, I want you to be careful when you deal with average numbers, because average sometimes mask the deeper problems. So for example here, when you look at the average in the euro area, the average unemployment rate is 11%. So this is an average. What does that mean? It means that there are some countries way below 11%, so unemployment rate is way below 11%, which is great. You don't want really high unemployment rate. But on the other side, there will be countries that's way above 11%. So 11% is just an average, okay? So for example here, if you look at Spain, the unemployment rate's 23%. It's a very shocking and high unemployment rate. And much of this is attributed to the crisis, or to the global financial crisis. However, even before that, unemployment rate was high in Spain. So that tells us more about the issue. This is the unemployment rate in Spain. So you see, it's been always high, even before the crisis. Okay. So the idea here, well, it could be something to do with labor markets. That's why we will study labor markets, and as I said, this probably will be one lecture or more, so it could be like a week, so we'll see how we get on with the material. But in general, what I'm saying here is that labor markets are a very important section in the economy that we will cover. But as an example here, we would like to understand why unemployment rate, the unemployment rate in Spain has been really high, even before the crisis. And I know it looks worse after the crisis, but still that means there's something related to really how the labor market in Spain function. So this is something we want to understand. Many economists believe that it's more about labor market rigidities, meaning that the labor market is not flexible, and that has to do with the regulation and the protection of workers. So some people believe that in Spain, workers are too much protected, and that's why firms or businesses become hesitant to or reluctant to hire new workers. So it's not easy to fire them. There's so many problems. They have too much protection. Okay, that's why the firms don't really hire enough workers. So this is something we'll talk about in detail when we discuss labor markets. But for now, we at least understand, and we will talk about unemployment rate as well. So for now, we understand that this is something important to monitor if you want to understand the economic performance in a given region or a country. So, of course, there are always people who, with or against the having or being part of an economic bloc like the European area. So obviously supporters will say, okay, since we have, they deal with the euro, then there's no exchange rate, so there's more, you're more certain about, so if you a businessman or if you're a firm operating in one country and just moving across countries now within the bloc is much easier. Now you don't have to worry about exchange rate or dealing with different currency. You're actually dealing with the euro. Okay, so that could be one advantage. So being within the euro area, and also becoming a large economic power is important too. Okay, because if you look at the euro area as single countries, probably you'll see, okay, so they're not going to be as powerful as the bloc, the entire bloc. So that is the idea. Being part of a large economic power, that comes with some advantage as well. But on the other side, there are drawbacks of being part of the euro area, one of which is that you don't have control over your monetary policy as a single country. Okay, so you don't really having a common monetary policy across all countries is something make it difficult for those countries that, let's say, if Spain want to boost their economies, they want to deal with unemployment rate or high unemployment. Okay, so if they want to deal with that using the monetary policy tools, they can't. They don't have control over monetary policy. They're part of the euro area, so they can't do that. They no longer have control over that. Okay? So the idea here is that having a common monetary policy for all countries is like one size fits all, which doesn't exist. It doesn't work. Okay? And that is one of the problems. Obviously, when you have your exchange rate, your currency, the exchange rate itself could be used as adjusting mechanism. Okay? And this is something, again, we will discuss when we talk about monetary policy. But being part of the euro area, it doesn't give you that. Okay, so you can't do that. So you don't have this advantage of having the chance to adjust to shocks through the changes in your exchange rate, because there is no exchange rate. You're actually using, there's a common monetary policy, and there's only a single currency as well, the euro. So this is the second block, so the euro area. So we talked about the US. We start with the crisis, obviously, because this is one of the major events that happened in the past. Even some economists that they say this was the greatest recession happened since the Great Depression of 1929. So economists describe what happened in 2007, 2008 as the worst recession that happened since the Great Depression in 1929. Okay, so that is something very important to understand. So we moved in to talk about how big the United States economy is, how the economic performance in the United States before the crisis, during the crisis, and how they recovered after the crisis. We compare this with some indicators, macro indicators in the euro area, and we talk about some of the issues that face the euro area. What I'm going to conclude with is China. China is the second largest economy in the world. It's growing so fast. It's been growing for a long time, for really very fast. And according to some indicators, actually, it has overtaken the United States in terms of the size of the economy. Okay? So if you look at their GDP using the purchasing power parity, you will see that, and you rank economies across the world, you might find recently, over the last 2-3 years, you might find that the Chinese economy actually became bigger in size compared to the United States economy. So China is a major economic power. It's been growing, so they witnessed an incredible growth rate. Okay, it slowed down recently. Okay, but before that, it was really for a long time they've been growing so fast. However, as I said before, well, growth is good, but it's not enough. Does that mean people in China are enjoying a higher living standard, or standard of living, compared to the US? No. If you look at the very simple indicators that we used before, which is GDP per capita. So how do we get GDP per capita? Remember, this is the output per person, so you just divide the GDP by the population. So if you look at the size of the population, even if they are the same, well, I mean, many people will argue that the US economy is still the largest economy in the world, but that's fine. So even if they are the same, still, if you divide this by a larger number of population, which is the case with China, then that means much lower GDP per capita. Okay, so the population is more than 4 times that of the US. Okay, so the output of the GDP, I think that was in 2015, so it's not very up-to-date figure, but more or less it was 60% of that of the US GDP. So the output per person, or the GDP per capita, is 15% of that of the US GDP per capita. So it's a very large economy, but they have their own problems too. Okay? So again, that's why when you study macroeconomics, when you study GDP, how to measure GDP, how to calculate GDP, different ways of doing that, you still need to understand, okay, we have macro indicators, but you have to be very careful when you explain
or make conclusions based on these macro indicators. So yes, China has been growing very rapidly, as I said, for a long time, more than 30 years or 3 decades now. The economic growth in China has slowed down recently, but even during the crisis, even during the global financial crisis, the Chinese economy was growing. It was a bit slower, but it slowed down a little bit, but still it was growing. So that means in economic terms, very pure economic terms, they're doing very well. But again, it depends really how you interpret or how you explain these figures. As I said before, be careful when you deal with averages, because these mask or cover so many a lot of things that you probably wouldn't see just by looking at the GDP per capita or just the average growth rate. So if we follow the same set of indicators, when we look at growth rate, look at how the growth rate was 1990 to 2007, 10% growth rate. This is massive growth rate. This is average. Okay? So it's incredible growth rate. Even during the crisis, I said it slowed a little bit, but it was growing. Okay? So compared to the United States, it was minus, it was negative numbers, it was minus 2 point something. So in 2015, yes, slow down, but still growing. Okay, so it's not 10%, it's now around 5-6%, but it is growing. Okay, so and it's still a massive economy with so much potential. And some people explain the growth, the rapid output growth in China by their high accumulation of capital and technological progress. So again, we need to understand the determinants of growth. And this is something we'll cover in one of the lectures. So that is the idea. So whether it is China or any other country, we need to understand why. Okay? Why country X grow faster than country Y? Okay? Why China has been growing all that for all these decades? How this happened? Why other countries are still struggling? They're not actually doing well. I mean, if you look at many emerging economies, they grow so fast. But then, what is driving this growth? So these are questions that we hope to try to answer in this module when we talk about economic growth and the determinants of economic growth. Looking at the unemployment rate in China, sounds okay. So we look at 3.3% before the crisis. During the crisis, 4.3%. Inflation is very low in 2015. But anyway, so this is really what I wanted to do today. So I wanted to start with what is economics, what we're trying to do what is macroeconomics, what we are trying to do in macroeconomics, examples of what we're going to cover, and then I tried to link this to real-world data, looking at the global financial crisis, looking at the United States economy, the Chinese economy, the Euro area, and picking some of the main macro indicators that anyone who's trying to assess the economic performance in these countries or in these areas would actually look at. I'm not saying these are the only economic indicators that you'll be looking at, but mainly these are the 3 indicators: growth rate, so GDP growth rate, unemployment rate, inflation rate, and so on. So what next then? So where are we going to take this to? So next lecture I'll be talking in detail about GDP, how to measure GDP, all the sort of stuff related to GDP and GDP growth, different concepts, and how to understand it. I'll be talking about unemployment rate and inflation rate. What I want you to do is to prepare for the lecture if you can. It would be great if you could. What we did today is chapter 1 in the textbook. So if you read chapter 1 would be great. But for the next lecture, if you read chapter 2, would be very helpful. Okay? And as I said, if you have any questions, please email me. Thank you so much.